Myself for the purpose of making an opening statement. Good morning. Today, the House Oversight Committee is holding its first hearing on the massive fraud in Minnesota's social services program. Minnesota's social services, which are funded by you, the American taxpayer, are being ripped off. The most vulnerable are suffering as a result. Federal prosecutors estimate that these criminals have stolen at least $9 billion. The fraudsters, many of whom are from Minnesota's Somali community, have stolen from programs meant to feed needy kids, provide services to autistic children, house low-income and disabled Americans, and provide health care to vulnerable Medicaid recipients. Fraudsters like these take millions to enrich themselves while providing nothing, overstating or outright faking the services. How many children have gone hungry because fraudsters stole money that was intended to provide them with food? How many autistic children were denied services because fraudsters instead sent this money overseas? How many low-income seniors, people with disabilities, or those with mental illnesses were denied access to housing because fraudsters drained resources and pocketed the money for themselves? The breadth and depth of this fraud is breathtaking, and I fear that this is just the tip of the iceberg. The U.S. Department of Justice is already investigating another Minnesota service program after a disabled man battling drug addiction under the care of a fraudulent full-time provider died because of neglect. Governor Tim Walz, Attorney General Keith Ellison, and Minnesota's Democrat leadership have either been asleep at the wheel or complicit in these crimes. How could they allow this massive fraud to go on for years? This is why we're here today. We must expose this theft of taxpayer dollars and hold everybody accountable who let it happen. Today, we're joined by witnesses from Minnesota State House of Representatives who have been fighting this fight for years. These legislators are on the front lines, uncovering fraud in Minnesota's social services programs day in and day out and trying to get their state agencies to fix it. Thank you all for what you're doing to uncover the truth. This isn't just a Minnesota problem. It's a problem for taxpayers across the United States. About 35% of Minnesota's budget comes from federal grants. 35% of Minnesota's budget comes from federal grants. Hardworking Americans pay those taxes, and that money is being funneled to fraudsters, funding luxury homes, fancy cars, and vacations abroad. Some of it is even allegedly going overseas to support terrorists. And yet, Governor Walz, Attorney General Ellison, and Minnesota Democrats failed to act despite countless warnings. They failed Minnesotans and all Americans, handing millions of taxpayer dollars to fraudsters. They failed children and others in Minnesota. They failed their own state employees, some of whom have come forward as whistleblowers. These whistleblowers have told us that the Walz administration retaliated against employees who warned and alerted the administration to the fraud occurring within these social services programs. Again, Governor Walz accused employees who were simply doing their jobs of racism, Islamophobia, and threatened surveillance to silence them. President Trump and his administration are taking a whole-of-government approach and prosecuting these fraudsters. To date, the U.S. Department of Justice has charged 98 defendants in Minnesota fraud-related cases, 85 of whom are of Somali descent. 64 have already been convicted. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security is on the ground conducting investigations of suspected fraud sites in Minnesota. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services has frozen child care payments and started requiring documentation to prove entities are indeed providing child care. Other federal agencies are halting grant programs, investigating public housing fraud, and strengthening program eligibility requirements. The American people demand jail time for those who stole their hard-earned money and accountability for officials who sat by as resources were drained. Congress must ensure there is change and accountability so this does not happen again. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today. Americans, thank you all for exposing this critical issue. And with that, I yield to Ranking Member Garcia for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Comer. I just want to start by thanking, of course, our witnesses for being here today and for all the members being back. We all agree, I think everyone on both sides of the aisle can agree, that fraud is a threat at every level of government, in every private sector business, and to every single American. Fraud exists everywhere. When I was mayor of my hometown in Long Beach, we worked for better and more efficient government and took on fraud whenever it existed and wherever it appeared to protect taxpayers. It's something that all of us take seriously every single day. When we find fraud, we should punish people and those that are committing it against the American public, especially when it damages services that people rely on. Now, what we should not do is use fraud as an excuse to rip away aid from innocent people who follow the rules and need help in our society. We should fight fraud when people rip off programs designed to help working families. And also, we should fight fraud when large corporations and wealthy individuals dodge their own taxes and rig the system for their own benefit. And especially, we should fight fraud when figures in our government, particularly those in power within the White House or our agencies, get rich and profit from their offices. Fraud is never acceptable, and it undermines public trust, whoever commits it. But let's remember that some of the worst fraud and corruption is actually found at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Republicans like to talk about fraud in states with Democratic governors, oftentimes exclusively. But Republicans also have a president who has pardoned or reduced jail time for 25 criminals convicted of fraud in this year alone. Now, some of these fraudsters have made also huge campaign contributions to Donald Trump. And worst of all, Trump's pardons mean that these criminals can avoid paying back more than $1 billion, which they owe their victims, and dwarfs much of the fraud that the House majority wants to talk about today. This is actually the opposite of accountability. Instead, the House majority wants to excuse and cut programs, which they have done from the start. Now, Donald Trump's signature law cut money for health care and food programs. Medicaid and CHIP help almost half the kids in the United States see a doctor. And that we lost, of course, $1 trillion in those programs. Over 10 million people could lose health care. Trump's law also cut 40 million people who use SNAP. And this includes, by the way, 1 out of every 5 kids. And this is happening not just in Minnesota. The president plans to freeze more than $10 billion for child care subsidies, social services, and cash support for low-income families in Minnesota, New York, Colorado, Illinois, and my home state of California. Of course, we know these states have Democratic governors that Donald Trump wants to punish. And we should look at those consequences if we want to talk about fraud. In Minnesota, which we're talking about today, Donald Trump is removing child care funding for the entire state. That frozen funding provides child care for over 18,000 kids. These kids didn't commit fraud. So I want to know why they should be punished. Last night, he said he's withholding all possibly Medicaid funds from Minnesota, which could harm 1 in 5 residents. Now, in New York, another state he's threatening, that's over 66,000 innocent kids, while pardoning, of course, 25 fraudsters and robbing victims of over $1 billion. Donald Trump should have to face the kids and parents who will be hurt even though they've done nothing wrong. I want to know what the president and the House majority expect the parents of these kids to do. Many don't seem to care. He wants to pardon and protect more rich crooks and fraudsters who have robbed over $1 billion from innocent people. Now, in California, in my home state, this threatens over 176,000 kids. 176,000 kids. Well, he continues, of course, to pardon fraudsters and connected folks that have donated immense amounts of money to his campaign. Now, this hurts not just Democratic families, but Republican families. It's innocent kids, regardless of political party, who need child care. We are in an affordability crisis, and the majority is not going after the real fraud that's being committed to the American public. Now, in Illinois, he has threatened funding for more than 62,000 kids. 62,000 kids. And finally, in Colorado, the other state that he's going after, more than 16,000 kids will lose funding. But we know, of course, that the president will let his friends get away with crime. And I want to point out one last thing, which is so important. While Donald Trump attacks these states, The Wall Street Journal on Monday reported a massive Mississippi scandal. Mississippi, of course, isn't on Trump's list. We don't have witnesses from Mississippi here today. Oversight Republicans aren't calling in Governor Tate. And I think the question is, why? We have real fraud happening, yet there's zero interest, apparently, in what's happening here in Mississippi and other places. Republicans want to cut benefits and attack states with Democratic governors. And what it's done, particularly in places like Minnesota, it has unleashed bigotry and hate. Minnesota child care centers have become the target of harassment and even vandalism and theft. Parents are afraid to drop their kids off in the morning and go to work. This is an opportunity, again, to attack for the House majority and smear innocent people without evidence. If we cared about fraud, we'd be starting at the very top. This is critical for the country and to actually take on fraud and abuse and the fraudsters that are being pardoned across the United States. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I would like to now welcome our witnesses here today. First, we have Kristen Robbins, Chairwoman of the Fraud Prevention and State Agency Oversight Policy Committee and representative for District 37A in the Minnesota House of Representatives. Welcome. Next, we have Walter Hudson, a member of the Fraud Prevention and State Agency Oversight Policy Committee and representative for Minnesota's District 30A. Next, we have Marion Rarick, a member of Fraud Prevention and State Agency Oversight Policy Committee and representative for District 29B in Minnesota. Lastly, we have Brendan Ballou, a former special counsel at the Department of Justice. So thank you all for joining us, and we look very forward to your testimony today. This is an issue the American people are very interested in. Pursuant to Committee Rule 9G, the witnesses will please stand and raise their right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record show that the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Thank you all, and you may take a seat. We appreciate you being here today and look forward to your testimony. Let me remind the witnesses that we have read your written statements, and they will appear in full in the hearing record. Please limit your oral statements to 5 minutes. As a reminder, please press the button on the microphone in front of you so that it is on and the members can hear you. When you begin to speak, the light in front of you will turn green. After 4 minutes, the light will turn yellow. When the red light comes on, your 5 minutes have expired, and we would ask that you please wrap up. I now recognize Representative Robbins for her opening statement.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members. Thank you for inviting us to testify. As chair of the Fraud Prevention Committee in Minnesota, I've been working to uncover the massive fraud under Tim Walz, propose solutions, and hold state agencies accountable. Today, I will highlight the scale of the problem, outline the work our committee is doing to fight the fraud, and provide a roadmap for other states on how to detect and stop fraud. Minnesota is one of the highest tax states in the nation, and hardworking Minnesotans have been told that they don't pay their fair share for years. In truth, Minnesotans pay much more in taxes than in other states, and when they pay their taxes, they expect that their money is going to things that help our communities: roads, schools, healthcare, and law enforcement. They do not want their tax dollars absconded by criminals to buy resorts and apartment buildings in Kenya, property in Turkey, and luxury homes and cars in the U.S. Tim Walz and his administration have willfully turned a blind eye to crime in the face of countless whistleblower and auditor reports, as well as stories by local investigative journalists and the Center of the American Experiment. These are actual crimes that must be punished. They are crimes against our moral values and erode trust in government. The time for accountability and justice is here. First, we are unearthing staggering amounts of fraud in Minnesota. As far back as 2014, there were credible whistleblower allegations of millions in daycare fraud. Instead of shutting it down, the state minimized whistleblower reports and allowed fraud to grow. Unfortunately, child care fraud was just the tip of the iceberg. Since 2019, Tim Walz and Minnesota Democrats have allowed fraud to absolutely explode in Minnesota. There's been more than $300 million in the Feeding Our Future child nutrition program scandal, and the Feeding Our Future prosecutions revealed that as many as half of those indicted also ran other Medicaid-funded programs. Yet despite this being known back in 2023, Tim Walz and his agencies have done nothing to stop those defendants from getting additional state money. We have now found fraud in multiple Medicaid programs, including autism centers, sober homes, non-emergency medical transportation, integrated community supports, and housing stabilization. Just last month, our committee held a hearing on credible allegations of fraud in 2 new areas, adult day services and assisted living. First U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson, the leading prosecutor in these cases from the Biden administration and the Trump administration, says the fraud could be an astronomical $9 billion. In the face of mounting reports and literal criminal indictments and convictions, the Walz administration has repeatedly and publicly denied or downplayed the fraud. Just last January, the commissioner of DHS, Jody Harpstead, who'd been on the job for 5.5 years, said, "There's a lot more rumors of fraud than there is actual fraud." You cannot make this up. The Walz administration has been gaslighting Minnesotans on the scale of the fraud problem for years. In response, when Republicans took control or ended Democrat control of the Minnesota House last year, we created the Fraud Prevention and State Agency Oversight Committee. Since last February, we have held 15 hearings where we have grilled officials, exposed new areas of fraud, and repeatedly flagged failures in internal controls. I authored a new law to expand whistleblower protection, and we created a portal, mnfraud.com, resulting in a surge of new whistleblower reports that our amazing staff is still working through. Under the leadership of our Vice Chair, Patty Anderson, we passed a bipartisan bill in the Senate to create an independent Office of Inspector General. When it got to the House, Democrats killed it because the DHS commissioner testified against it. The Tim Walz administration has utterly failed to protect Minnesota taxpayers and vulnerable citizens, ignoring years of credible reports and retaliating against those who spoke up, often by claiming they were racist or Islamophobic. Tim Walz and the Democrats have repeatedly protected their political base at the expense of all Minnesotans. Other states should learn from the failures of the Walz administration. So I'll give you a quick roadmap on how to find and stop fraud. First, culture matters. Fraud flourishes when leaders ignore it and criminals see they can get away with it. Second, fraud flourishes when basic internal controls are not followed. This is not complicated. Third, you have to look at the interconnections of relationships in businesses in multiple program areas in Medicaid. It's a huge red flag that has been ignored in our state. Finally, it is important to say what is true and to stand up against fake allegations of racism or Islamophobia. Crime is crime, no matter who is committing it. It is true that the majority of the fraud in Minnesota has taken place in the Somali community. And it is also true that some of our best whistleblowers are from the Somali community. Democrats refuse to acknowledge this truth, and that has enabled criminals to steal billions and hurt our vulnerable citizens. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to share the lessons from Minnesota and for your help in investigating these crimes. The time for justice and accountability is now.
I now recognize Representative Hudson for his opening statement.
Chairman, ranking member, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today for the record. I am Minnesota State Representative Walter Hudson, a second-term member who sits on our House Fraud Prevention and State Agency Oversight Committee. The recent national conversation about fraud in Minnesota has been fraught with distractions, diverting from critical concerns regarding process, policy, and oversight to sideshow concerns about personalities and partisan politics. My role here today is to cut through all of that and provide you with a clear picture of a culture which has developed over many years around the several generous benefit programs which Minnesota provides to our residents. Well-documented oversight failures have led to a lack of program integrity, creating incentives for people to monetize programs beyond their legislative intent to turn benefits into business. Contrary to the claim just made by the ranking member that there is no evidence of this fraud, attached to my written testimony, you will find a document which collates several reports made over the past 15 years by Minnesota's nonpartisan Office of Legislative Auditor, along with transcripts of each of our hearings from the Fraud Committee, where we heard directly from staff and leaders within the state agencies which administer these programs. Here's what that record indicates. Within the state of Minnesota, government oversight has been unable to keep up with program expansion due to a combination of factors. One, rapid expansion of funding and provider participation. 2, payment systems that prioritize access and speed. 3, verification mechanisms that occur after funds are distributed. 4, oversight capacity that does not scale with spending. And 5, diffuse accountability across agencies and contractors. This combination of factors has fostered a booming new sector of the economy that relies upon the continuation of and expansion of government programs to fuel private sector profits. I want to be clear, even when the law is being followed precisely by every jot and tittle, incentives still exist to abuse these programs and waste taxpayer dollars by diverting funding to profit centers rather than providing a safety net for those in temporary need. Now, criminal fraud is rampant. Deputy U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson, serving the District of Minnesota, has said that he could keep 1,000 prosecutors busy, but he's limited to a mere 25, only 5 of which are tasked with building fraud cases. He estimates that the total amount of criminal fraud over 5 years may reach $9 billion, which is fully 1/2 of the money that has been directed to these programs by the state. While Governor Tim Walz and other stakeholders dispute that assessment, the point I wish to emphasize is this. Whatever the actual number is, the full scope of the problem is not just criminal fraud, but a culture of profiting from government programs in perpetuity, not as a safety net, but as an industry. I have personally met and had discussions with folks who identify themselves as consultants for multiple entities accepting government benefits. They have made a career out of showing people how to leverage the gaps in government oversight to maximize benefit payments. Now, such conduct may not actually break the law, and that's the point. We have a system whereby an entire industry can operate under the color of law, raking in tremendous profits for individuals, all while having no incentive to save the taxpayer money or lift legitimate beneficiaries out of need. Instead, as the market for funneling benefits into businesses increases, so too does the perceived need for benevolent services. If nothing changes, if oversight is not tightened, if incentives are not changed, spending on these programs will only continue to increase with no commensurate increase in either public good or public confidence in our governing institutions.